Okay. We, last time we had a glitch with our recording, so we have to test out to make sure that this is being picked up. But you can't participate. Well, that's what we're checking out. I had 2.5 hours worth of recording of nothing. So it was I had to rely on my notes, which I'll... Let's see if Matt is picking this up. I sent him a text. Yeah. Four, 7. Yes, we are. Shall we have our vice chair then? Service.
Well, this meeting of the County BPAC is in session, and of course, this is the public comment period, and seeing none, excuse me, what's she? He's on his way, or he's not on his way?
No, we're checking to see if it's recording. The last meeting had 2.5 hours of no voices.
Okay.
Which was unfortunate.
All right. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay. Minutes are approved.
Chairperson,
Yeah. Indicate which person. Okay. Did you get that down, or do I need to repeat?
Did get this down, yes.
Oh,
Thank
he
you.
just gave me the little thing about saying who moved and seconded.
Yes.
And I'm
Olson
going to
and
get
Reinders.
I'm going to get names wrong for sure. So please forgive me about that. And yeah, let's do that and make sure.
David Favello, representing the local area.
Jeremy Lokirko, TransPAC representative.
Paul Reinders, Transplan rep.
Ole Olson, I believe I'm the federal Glover appointee. Is that right? That's right.
And Bill Pinkham, Bike East Bay.
Andy Dillard with SWAT.
Joanna Pollock with WICTAC.
Okay. Who made the motion? Was it you, Jerry? No. It was, okay. And who seconded that? It was Paul. All right. Okay, so we'll, since the minutes are approved, we will move on to item 4. And
thank
Brad?
you. Let me give you a brief update on the status. The authority is going to be meeting on Wednesday, and we will be discussing how to move forward on a potential transportation expenditure plan for a new half-cent sales tax. There are a number of options that the authority is considering. We completed much of the public outreach. We've had an expenditure plan advisory committee meeting periodically. Some of the options are to delay the countywide, the transportation expenditure plan process, because there seems, for a number of reasons, one of which is EPAC is having trouble coming to some agreement on how to move forward on it and what consensus is. There are about twice as much people have characterized it as there are twice as many demands as funds that we would get through the measure, and the authority has not been able to get down to a proposed expenditure plan to do analysis on. The authority will continue, however, to go forward with the countywide transportation plan. We still propose to have a plan that includes a financially constrained list that reflects the regional transportation projects that are in the regional transportation plan. And we will have some options that could become a transportation expenditure plan that will be analyzed in the EIR on the countywide transportation plan. That's still going to go forward. And we hope to have that adopted in May of the coming year. We also expect that there'll be some controversy about the EIR, and we may have some issues that are raised about the analysis that's contained in it. That's something else that the authority is considering. So we won't have any confirmed approach until after Wednesday night's meeting. So if you'd like, I can send out an email to the committee members letting you all know what's going on with that. Okay, I can do that. Are there any? I would like to. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Jeremy?
Brad, at our last meeting, we made some comments about the breakdown of each of the EIR alternatives that were going to be under consideration.
Yeah.
Is that general theory or that general breakdown still a part of the proposal, or is what we commented on before, is that now back up for dilution or change or revision?
Well, it's something that we're going to bring to the authority on Wednesday. What this committee suggested, but it's this committee and the EPAC and the city managers and the public outreach. All of that's going to be considered in the development of the transportation expenditure plan. Some of this committee's recommendation is similar to some of the other recommendations, and some of them are differs from other parts. The city managers, for example, really want 30% of a new measure with no strings attached other than the growth management program requirements. So no one has come down yet on any particular option.
Ole? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had my hand up. The full board meeting is 6 p.m. Wednesday night?
It is.
And the city managers, could you expand on that a little bit? They want 30% to go to them for whatever they want to spend it on, as in local streets?
Yes.
Really?
Really.
Cool. And the bicyclists are only getting 0.5%?
This committee was recommending a much higher percentage than that.
Right.
And there are other groups, well, at the last authority meeting, Bike Concord and other bicyclists came and asked for at least 15%. So that's another thing that the authority is considering. You know, the city managers generally want to have a bigger share of any new expenditure plan. They want, and 30% is generally the number that they've come down on.
Any other questions? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to item 5.
Okay, I've put together a request for proposal. It would be request for proposal 16-1. We already have a RFP number. It'll be the first one of next year. And it's very similar to the one that we did for the last major update of the Countywide Bike Ped Plan. There are a couple of things that I want to point out and go over with the committee and make sure we covered everything that we discussed at the last. I covered everything that we all discussed at the last meeting. I updated, go to page 9 of the RFP, which is page 510 of your packet. The county, it discusses the countywide bicycle pedestrian plan. There are some updates on that because this RFP was originally for updating and creating the 2009, so I added some more information on what was included in the 2009. Added more updates on Measure J because it was still somewhat unclear what the requirements for Measure J were going to be. But the thing I wanted to point out the most was Section 4, which is on page 13 of the RFP, under the section called Goals and Objectives. And I've significantly reworked this section, starting off, and I tried to reflect what some of the discussion that we had at our last meeting, and I just want to make sure first that this meets what you think we discussed and approved last time, and if I missed anything or you see some things that should be changed or reworded. It starts off with the objectives to harmonize local plans for bicycle and pedestrian networks, to understand better, that should be the patterns of bicycle and pedestrian travel in Contra Costa and changes in those patterns that are expected. That's something we discussed a bit last time about trying to get a better understanding of how many people bicycle, where they bicycle. Broaden our understanding of where and why people walk or bicycle in Contra Costa, supplementing existing information. And I mentioned some information that we talked about last time, such as the e-locker use at BART stations, and MTC and authority monitoring, and then expanding that with some new technologies or new techniques. Expand and improve the tools available to jurisdictions and agencies to evaluate the impacts of proposed land use and network changes. That's something that the committee discussed last time pretty extensively. To establish performance measures for evaluating the success of the authority and achieving the goals of the Countywide Bike Ped Plan. Refining the criteria used to evaluate proposed improvements. To update the best practices toolkit. To identify gaps in the bicycle network and the magnitudes of deficiencies in the pedestrian network. I worded it that way because it's easier to identify the gaps in the planned and existing bicycle network because we have the information from the local jurisdictions. The pedestrian network, on the other hand, we don't have a good survey or information on how extensive the sidewalk and crosswalk network is in the county. Some jurisdictions probably have a pretty good understanding, and others have a less good understanding of where sidewalks are and what condition they're in. Though if I'm wrong about that, it's possible we could expand the identification of gaps to the pedestrian network as well. The next two are to devise an implementation program that outlines feasible actions the authority can take, and then to refine the policies in the bike ped plan to better reflect changes in authority and regional policies, new legislation and programs, changes in travel behavior, and new research. So those are the goals and objectives that we're hoping that the consultants who propose will respond to. The next section is on services to be provided. Task 1 is to refine the scope of work and develop the schedule. There'll be outreach. One of the things we're looking for is ways to use the public outreach to understand better where people bicycle and walk and when they do that. And I left it pretty open because I wanted to get input from the consultants on how they might do it, get their ideas, and rather than prejudging what they might do. I also left open whether we would actually have any public workshops or not, where people came and attended and perhaps just rely on other forms of outreach, whether it's, say, online surveys or telephone town halls. The authorities had pretty good success with telephone town halls. We just had one last week for West County. And in that, people, instead of driving to someplace, they call up. It's like a call-in radio program, like KQED's Forum, say. And they ask questions, or they just listen in to what the questions are and what the responses are. So that's another technique that we might consider. The next section is collecting and evaluating background data. It's similar, looking at the physical and development context, existing and forecast demographics, considering how different socioeconomic groups, what their needs are and how they differ. Existing facilities and programs, including updating the bicycle facility GIS, an analysis of collisions, analysis of connections to transit, analysis of plans and programs that are relevant to the program, investments. I've split off the estimation of current and future demand as a separate task. Then identifying potential changes and options, how we might rework the plan is task 5. And that background data and analysis of future demand and the options would be included in a document, an issues and options paper. And then there would be the draft and final countywide bike ped plans. We also included a CEQA assessment as part of the task, because I don't want to do it this time myself. So are there any comments or suggested changes to the scope or the goals and objectives?
Yeah, I'd like a little more clarification on how we're going to update the actual bicycle facilities. Like, I know there's been a lot of bike lanes installed and a lot of facilities since the last update. Are we going to try to first how is that going to go? Are we going to first reach out to the cities in the county to find out what their updates are? Or are we going to have the consultant do this all on their own?
Well, for the consultant, my idea was the consultants would be the ones doing it. But to do that, they would contact the jurisdictions to see how the information that we have now has changed. Whether some of the projects that are shown as planned but not built have been built.
Right.
Or if there are some that are existing are no longer existing, those sorts of changes. But it would be the consultant going out to the jurisdiction staff.
I'm just a little concerned because I know the last time we tried to update this, it took many iterations and they really still never got it right as far as the city of Pittsburgh. So I'm just wondering if we could write something in this scope. I don't know how we can write it so that I'm not sure how to do this, but I'd like to some more assurance that we're going to be updating it to reflect what's out there today. And I don't know if relying on cities to provide that will be enough. Or I don't know how else who else we're going to rely on, but I'm just concerned.
Are you suggesting that we can't rely on the jurisdictions to tell us what?
We need to rely on jurisdictions to give us updated information. Guess I don't really have a solution here. I'm just concerned that this update reflect a true update of what we have existing today.
Yes.
I think one of the issues last time, from what I remember, is, not all the jurisdictions obviously sit on this committee, so it was just a participation thing. I know for SWAT, I brought it to our respective RTPCs and made sure that we all submitted our updates. But I think that was the prime reason why there were things missed. I don't know if that was the case for Pittsburgh, but I know for other jurisdictions, if they didn't directly sit on this committee, they were slow to get their information to the consultant. So maybe just earlier outreach to all the cities, whether through the RTPC process or otherwise, so we can have a focused effort and make sure we get all the updates we need. So.
I thought of an idea. Is there any way we can have a sign-off by the cities and the county that says this accurately reflects today's
Withhold the
facilities?
return to source.
Well, again, I'm actually looking at it from the other side of it. I'm not looking at I understand compliance from the local jurisdictions is needed, but I'm also looking at what happened to. I sit on this committee. I work with, I think it was Fair and Peers, many iterations, and then it got published before it was final, before I really signed off on it, before it accurately reflected what existed back then. So in the plan today, it had a few. There weren't major mistakes, but I'm saying I'd like some procedure where a city can actually sign off saying this accurately reflects, to the best of our knowledge, what we have in place today or what we have planned for today. Because it never happened. It got published without me saying, yeah, this is now accurate. And that's my concern. I'd like them to assure that they have the assurance from the local jurisdiction that it accurately is what they sent them. I sent them many maps, many lists, and they still, I don't know why it was so difficult, but we never got it right. So I don't know if that's needed this time or.
Yeah, a couple of comments. One, I think that I'd like to see Bike East Bay intimately involved. We've been working on a number of projects, especially protected bikeways, and so we know where they're at, that kind of thing, where the function's at. And of course, we're working with the jurisdictions. So we're kind of nexus, and I think it would be very valuable to keep in close touch, if not with the board, at least with our ED, maybe a combination. And one other point unrelated to that, and that is in terms of access to transit. When we did Richmond's bike ped plan, we were concerned about disadvantaged communities, communities of color and so on, being able to, these are often people that don't have cars, that we had some clear and easiest routes to Richmond Transit Center, major bus lines, that sort of thing. And I would like to see that reflected in our work too, and that be noted and so on.
So who did this and where does it reside?
Pardon me?
The information that you developed on routes to transit, where are those, who did it, and where's that information kept?
Well, in our city, it is reflected in the plan. It was another fair and peers, of course. The EPA has a really nice site, EJ Review, where you can actually plot in a given city factors like income, race, where they are, areas that are, sections that are subject to extreme pollution, something like Atchison Village in Richmond across the street from Chevron, that sort of thing. Anyway, there are a number of factors. You can get a pretty good picture of what's going on. I participated in a webinar. It was national, but oddly enough, there are only several of us, so I got to ask the EPA people quite a number of questions, and we did some sample use of the system, and I was impressed. It works pretty well. So that's one source, anyway. And what, Oli?
Thank you. With regard to existing facilities and programs, I think another bullet point here could be to ask the existing clubs and advocacy organizations to check our existing list of existing facilities and to weigh in on that. They might not, but they might.
Just to respond to that, Oli, we do have now 2 people employed doing advocacy work. So the staff has grown a bit, and we should have ability to do that, plus bringing in the local working groups. Some kind of getting the information from those.
Directly ask Bike Walnut Creek and Bike Concord and the Delta Peddlers and BEB, say, this is what we got. Please compare what we got with what is actually on the ground, and have another column for what we want.
Can I comment on that? I guess I like the idea. I really do. Getting more input.
It might work, it might not.
Well, again, the conflict of when a local jurisdiction does not have a bike facility planned and a bike group wants that bike facility planned. I could see that happening a lot. So as long as we're under the understanding that the jurisdiction does have the final say, you can always petition the city council, and there's avenues of getting that plan changed, but the ultimate authority would be the city's plan as far as future facilities.
Yeah, I won't.
All right. Well, then I'm in favor of that.
So other questions, comments?
Could I ask Bruce a question?
Sure.
So what you're suggesting is a kind of ground truthing by people who are users of the facilities, basically, and then using that ground truthing as something to send back as feedback to the jurisdictions, knowing that.
I like the sound of that. You analyzed what Paul and I had to say and hit the nail on the head, I think. Involve the users of the facility to make sure that the map is up to date, ask them what they want, and then shoot it by city staff to see if it's at all feasible.
Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry.
I had a couple comments. Before I kind of get into my own comments, I just wanted to kind of touch on what my other committee members just stated. I would agree with Paul. My concern here and the role of this group is that in many jurisdictions, including Walnut Creek, it took us quite a great number of months, many months, and there were a lot of public outreach meetings that went in public input that went to develop a plan. And what I don't want to have is I don't want a countywide plan that's going to conflict with local jurisdictions. The local jurisdictions, these bicycle plans were developed and vetted. I think in some cases they're memorialized in a city's general plan. So what we can't have is we can't just arbitrarily change a bicycle facility, which is a component of the general plan, without going through a holistic process. So while I respect the role of the advocacy groups, I think there's also, like Paul indicated, it needs to start at ground zero with the it needs to end with the jurisdictions to be able to make that determination on whether or not, those additional facilities could be utilized. Couple comments that I had.
Follow up on that particular point with you, and that because it does raise an issue. It's one of the objectives that I listed was to harmonize local plans, and if you're trying to do a countywide plan that sets out a countywide vision, one of the things that would be important in that process would be to make sure that where jurisdictions meet and they plan different facilities, that they connect. And that's something that, if you're doing your own general plan, and a lot of times you'll just stop at your city limits or at your sphere of influence, depending on how you do your plan. But one of the things that I was hoping we could do is to try to, if there are conflicts at those edges, that we, through the process, get the jurisdictions to work together. I mean, maybe you do it at the RTPC level, maybe you do it in some more individual way with, Antioch and Pittsburgh, say, or El Cerrito and Richmond, say, another San Pablo and Richmond. There are lots of jurisdictions, and the county, of course, is involved in just about every jurisdiction. I don't know of any. Are there any jurisdictions that don't share a border with the county somewhere? I think not, but I don't think so. Anyway, that's a process that I'm hoping we can go through, and it's not necessarily a conflict with what you're mentioning, but
well, to the degree, and I have a question as to what that word harmonize. I don't understand. Here again, the local plans were developed with local input. In some cases, the local jurisdictions know the facility much better than the county, than CCTA would. So there may be certain limitations. There may be issues why certain facilities can't be accommodated on certain roadways. And so I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that these plans, especially when they're part of a general plan or a transportation element of a general plan, need to recognize that whatever the countywide role is here in terms of trying to marry the plan, if we're trying to identify the conflicts between jurisdictions, that's one thing. But what we can't have is we can't have the CCTA plan trump the local jurisdiction's ability to be able to have input or revise their general plan and go through that process, because it is a painstaking, long process that many jurisdictions went through to develop their plan. And as such, there may be, in some cases, there may be opportunities to do even more on a local level than what the countywide plan may be able to identify. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm all supportive of that. It just needs to be, knowing the CCT, nothing against CCTA, but knowing the last time we went through this update, there was very little public outreach that was done. I don't remember having a huge number of public meetings where everyone showed up and there was a room full of people. I can't say that that's the case on local level. Local levels, whether it's in Concord or Walnut Creek or Pittsburgh, they tend to get a lot more focus, and generally there's a greater amount of input. And so I wouldn't want to slip in some changes without being able to recognize that the public process, for good and for bad, is important here. And so that was my comment on that first bullet point. I'm going to have a couple more here. The second thing, when it says devise an implementation program that outlines feasible actions that the authority can take, I would be, if you could have any information on what that means. I'm not quite sure what you mean by devise an implementation program. Usually when jurisdictions build out facilities, it's based on priority and where the local jurisdictions have determined these facilities are located. In some cases, they just happen to coincide with larger CIP improvements on roadways, and so there's no specific rhyme or reason. But if we could clarify that bullet point, because I think it's great to come up with an implementation program. We just want to make sure that it's reasonable and it's achievable. And then the last comment that I had is there's really nothing in here that talks about, from a regional perspective or from a countywide perspective, looking at potentially bike and ped facilities that would be considered routes of regional significance. And I know that in the last update, that was something that some RTPCs were wanting to include, was to expand and identify where are the regional routes and I'm saying of regional routes of significance, not as it pertains to Measure J, but I'm talking about regional routes of importance that cyclists would use, like the regional trails, Lafayette, Moraga. I don't know if there's anything in here that would get us in that direction. I know that some RTPCs aren't in favor necessarily of having it tied to Measure J, but I think having some sort of recognition that some facilities aren't local in nature, some facilities are regional in nature, and those are the ones that, when it comes to prioritizing, maybe those are the ones that we really look at, because I would love to see some sort of identification, maybe that's part of your implementation program, something that helps local jurisdictions prioritize, not only locally, but what are the regional facilities that are of regional significance that deserve maybe a higher rating or higher criteria when it comes to giving out money, grant opportunities. It's just a comment. I don't know if there's been any thought to that. I'm not necessarily advocating for a specific designation of a route of regional significance for bikeways, but I think having those noted or highlighted so that way it will help local jurisdictions identify where the gaps are in the network if those routes are going through those jurisdictions. I think that would be helpful. So those are my comments.
I appreciate all of Jeremy's comments, especially about the harmonizing the local plans. Just want to touch on that again. I know it may be a lot of effort trying to, especially at the borders, but I really like what Brad said about trying to come with some kind of a resolution to where our borders disagree as far as what facility is needed to cross the border. I think this would be a great challenge for the consultant to try to harmonize these plans, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done as far as doing that. I think that's the reluctance of some jurisdictions to come up with an agreement on how to cross the border with a facility or without a facility. So again, I really think that should be emphasized in harmonizing the plans is at the borders.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, I agree that maybe there should be a little differentiation between the kinds of interjurisdictional access like bike trails, bike ped, and big corridors of traffic. I'm thinking of El Cerrito's recent decision to do protected bikeways on San Pablo Avenue, which I'm sure everybody knows is a fairly dangerous spot to ride. And in Oakland, Berkeley, they're going to have protected bike lanes on Telegraph Avenue, similar situation. So I think that we should not necessarily separate them out, but at least look at those categories and maybe even to think about the danger of certain areas and certain places to travel. When we think about commuters, they're not necessarily they may use it, but they're not necessarily on the Bay Ridge Trail or, that sort of thing. Where there is one close by, like the Ohlone Greenway, they're going to use it. But, I ride it regularly in those places, and, I'd like to see some protected bike lanes and like to see it connected. Yes.
Well, backtracking a little bit to getting accurate information about what's existing and what's not. When I looked on Google Earth, it was no big thing to just zoom in and you can see the sharrows, you can see the bike lanes. There was one place listed between Crockett and Port Costa that showed a dirt trail was supposed to be a bike lane. Existing bike lane. So it doesn't take a lot to just go to your computer and verify it. You don't have to do a lot of travel. And just on gap closures and environmental justice, there's no better example than the shortcut BART trail from here over to Minard and David that is just on the sideline now because 3 jurisdictions couldn't decide who was going to pay for the maintenance and policing of it. But that's a project that really should be looked into again.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Not to beat this to death, but regarding input and accuracy and consistency, and I do echo Jeremy's comments. I appreciate those regarding consistency with local general plans, but it might behoove us to maybe at some point run some sort of, not final draft, but draft final, something to the TCC to review because, we have engineers, planners, and transportation professionals that are well in tune with their bike networks. So maybe that might be something worth doing as a final look over to make sure we get everybody's input and check for consistency there. So, and then regarding task 2 outreach, I might also suggest possibly adding some walking surveys. I know down in South County we've done a few of those, and we try to target bike rides or bike events or farmers markets, those types of things. You get a little bit different perspective, and you get sometimes cast a wider net on feedback in regards to biking and walking. So that would be worth looking into as well. So.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that in terms of we'll look at situation on the ground that we shouldn't lose sight of issues that affect pedestrians. We are like pedestrian advisory committee. So I've been on walks like that. One very good one led by Jen Abelson, who a lot of you probably know. And that, of course, emphasized a lot what happens to a disabled person in this route and so on. But pedestrians in general, whether are there bulb outs, is there an island of safety, that sort of thing. We should spend some time on that. We usually talk about bikes, let's face it, and it's fine with me, but I think we should maybe spend a little more time dealing with pedestrian issues and, well, anyway.
And just to expand on that, I think it would be really helpful to have, and maybe as part of the scope, I don't know if it would come as part of the deliverable, but it would be great to have a kind of a grab bag of design options that jurisdictions can use. There's large swaths of the county that have no curb, gutter, and sidewalk. They make it very difficult for pedestrians to safely go from point A to point B. We hear it all the time in Walnut Creek. I'm sure it's not indifferent from other parts of the county. I think it would, but just because there's not a curb, gutter, and dedicated sidewalk doesn't mean that there's not mechanisms or design improvements that can be done to increase safety for the pedestrian. And so I would love to actually be able to provide and push out that information to the local jurisdictions. I know Fair and Piers has developed stuff, at least even for Walnut Creek and our PED plan that we're working on, that provide a very context-sensitive solution for pedestrian facilities, assuming that not every place is going to be able to afford to build out a sidewalk and everything like that. But I do think it's important because it doesn't only affect areas near major destinations like shopping plazas or whatever, but also it impacts people's ability to have general access to schools, to parks, things that often fall off the radar as things that require accessibility. So I definitely think that pedestrian component of the plan could really be spruced up a little bit and could be developed a little bit more, because a lot of jurisdictions struggle with trying to come up with a good design alternative that would accommodate both the vehicles and the pedestrian when there's just not a lot of right-of-way. So,
Remind folks that we have about 5 minutes. Are there more questions and comments? 5 minutes, though. Munchies, that is. Well, oh, I'm sorry, CCAT. it's a strange thing for people on bike these days.
Oh, yeah. Well, they read their screens.
It's, yep. And I admit, I have a lot of emails. I'm right there too.
So you live closer to El Cerrito, Bart, than to Richmond, Bart?
Oh, yeah, quite a bit. Walking distance, very easy. No, it's one of the great pleasures about being where I am. It's right in the heart of it. Go away. Someday, maybe we'll get some either BART extension or some light rail up from further north. That's what I would really like to see. Take care of that. Hopefully, somehow take care of that awful mess in the I-80 corridor. I mean, it extends significantly. The jam up, huge, extends significantly past Hilltop Mall. It's unbelievable.
So you want Bart to Hilltop Mall?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, say yes. That's an appropriate thing to say.
Well, my only confusion is whether it should it be BART or would light rail might be a cheaper way to go because you don't have to dig all those tunnels. Or if you can get BART, on the surface, fine. But usually it has to be elevated. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have to be. I'm not sure of the engineering.
Right, let's see.
Well, if everybody's ready, mostly finished, we can start up again. And we have the call for projects, Measure J. And let me just ask you quickly a naive question, and that is, this is all money from the last Measure J, I assume. And is this the last call for projects before the new Measure J hopefully is passed, or is there more money in the pot for that? Do you expect another call after this one?
This call for projects would be for Measure J revenues that we expect. It'd be for 1% of the Measure J revenues that we expect through, well, that's one of the questions, either through fiscal year 19, so it'd be 16, 17, 18, and 19, or through fiscal year 22, so that it would match with the OBAG 2 call for project, which goes through fiscal year 22. It has nothing to do with the new measure, if there is a new measure. So basically what I did was to take the guidelines from the last time, from the first call for projects. I made really only two changes. One was based on what we discussed last time, reducing the maximum request to $1 million. That's on page 6.5, 6-5. Page 3 of the revised guidelines. And also made changes to the criteria, which is Exhibit B. And let me go through just what's in the program guidelines, just generally. There's a discussion of eligible sponsors, which are basically any public agency that's able to carry out an eligible project. So it's jurisdictions, but it could also be BART, who owns property. And BART did receive some money through the first call for projects through this program. The eligible projects are funding the design and construction of facilities that support walking and bicycling. It's limited to facilities, so it's a capital project, though it does fund the design, or can help fund the design of projects. One of the criteria is that the projects have to be in the Countywide Bicycle Pedestrian Plan, and there are three components of that it's specifically listed in the Appendix E, which is a list of the projects, It's identified in Appendix D, which is the map of existing and planned facilities, bicycle facilities, or if it's a pedestrian project that's located in a priority location, which would be a downtown, other pedestrian-oriented districts, access routes to transit stops and stations, and access routes to other activity centers. It's pretty open-ended for pedestrian projects. Though most of the projects were, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of the projects were bicycle projects in the last time that we funded. Minimum request was $50,000 last time, and proposed to be $50,000 this time. As I mentioned, the maximum request I've changed to $1 million. I mentioned ineligible projects, planning studies, for example, developing a pedestrian plan, though we did fund a pedestrian plan through the TLC program. Operations, such as the operation of a bike station, I should say ineligible for these funds, and maintenance of facilities is not funded.
Why does East Bay Regional Park District get to use it on maintenance?
They get,
Why are they an exception?
because the measure says they are. So there's basically 1.5% of, I should get closer to the microphone. Basically, there's 1.5% of the revenues go to the PBTF program, the Pedestrian Bicycle Trail Facilities Program. The 1% goes to this competitive program. The 5% goes to East Bay Regional Park District for maintenance and improvement of paved regional trails. That's exact quote from Measure J.
In West County, they're an exception because it's in Measure J as well.
West County has their own tiny share of both TLC, additional TLC, and additional pedestrian bicycle projects. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to it. I wasn't there when the decision was made, but it's just like anything else. We programmed our share of Measure J and used it in this way.
I remember. Thank you.
you're welcome. Then there's a discussion of the East Bay Regional Park District share, what's eligible, their requirement to have a maintenance of effort, and also the requirement that they have to go through the regional transportation planning committees for their proposed, how they're going to use their share of the funds. And it's roughly 1/4, it's 0.5%, so 0.125% of revenues go to each RTPC, roughly. The most recent East Bay Regional Park project is for the southwest area, and that is the rehab of a very large portion of the Iron Horse Trail. Most basically from, I think, Rudgare, I can't remember, it's Rudgare, Livorno, south to, actually, I think to Alameda County. There's a mention again of the West County share. It's a little bit broader than the program generally. Project selection for the county share and for the East Bay Park District share. Programming, there's the programming plan that we will update once we complete the call for projects and the project selection. One thing we have to decide on is the programming period. That's on page 7. It says the PBTF funds will use the same programming period used in the most recent Measure J strategic plan, and that goes out to fiscal year 19. As I mentioned earlier, the OBAG 2 programming period goes out to fiscal year 22, and there are arguments for keeping it at fiscal year 19 and arguments for extending it to fiscal year 22, there's more money to allocate if you go out to 22. You can get bigger projects. On the other hand, if you only program up through fiscal year 19, then if there are jurisdictions, agencies who have some projects they need some time to develop, there'll be some money in the not too distant future that they could allocate. And I think that's something that Paul mentioned the last time we discussed it, that he would prefer it to be fiscal year 19 rather than going to 22. And then there are the criteria that we added a new criterion on transit ridership to make it 10 criteria. I considered doing a poll to talk, sort of a survey of the committee members to see how to do the weighting, because I'd like to discuss what the weighting might be with you today. When you look at the board letter that I put together, 4 of the criteria, safety, range and number of user, countywide or regional significance, and destination served, their weighting was 15 out of 100. And latent demand, improved connectivity, feasibility, local and policy support, and matching funds were given 8 points. Transit ridership, since it's new, didn't have any points assigned because it wasn't there to have points assigned to it. So I'm open to hearing your comments and making adjustments to this. We can talk about the weighting as well, and I'm hoping that we can come up with that as well.
First, part of Bikey's Bay's mission is to see a seamless bike network in the Bay Area. So I have to stress that is very important.
As a follow-on to that, I'd like to see item 7, improved connectivity, lifted up the list maybe to between 1 and 2, just under safety.
I'm not ready for the criteria yet, but when you were talking about the timing, I'm just trying to figure it out. So TLC, OBAG, and this would all be on the same schedule, so you couldn't really change this timing to a 3-year or 5-year unless those were on a 3-year or 5-year, right?
No, we could. We could have them on different schedules. It's
As I recollect, it really helped to have PBTF and TLC at the same time. We've never done this with OBAG, but some of the projects could have gone either way in terms of they could have been a TLC project. Probably they could have been both or a TLC, not both, and a PBTF. But whatever. I think the cities would find it easier, but I'm not I represent cities. I'm not a city staff person. If they could have those two coincide time-wise, that would be and maybe Andy could talk to that more.
No other comments?
I'll add a little bit to that. I would agree with Joanna that, yeah, that would, as far as timeline goes, it'd be helpful that those were the same. I know I'm part of the OBAG working group. We were discussing formulating the new application, and we were talking about putting it under one application with 3 different modules, just for ease of, filling out application purposes. But definitely, but for not necessarily aligning the timeline with OBAG as far as extending it out 3 years or 5 years, if it's possible to keep PBTF and TLC on that same window, whether it's 3 or 5 would be helpful.
How much control do we really have over MTC when they do their cycles anyway, so. I don't know.
Almost none, I think, is the answer to that.
Bill?
Yes.
One more argument as far as keeping it the current schedule. We are updating the countywide update isn't going to be ready until after the call for projects. So, we'll have an updated countywide plan to go off of if we have another call for projects for the PBTF.
Yes, Hope.
So how are we going to allocate the points, particularly toward the ridership? Which I think should be farther down the list rather than there, but probably the 15s and the 8s are not in a particular order. Maybe, I don't know.
I have a proposal.
Speak.
If we keep the top 4 safety, range of users, countywide significance, and destination served at 15 points and add improved connectivity at 15 points, then we could lower the other 5 to 5 points, including transit ridership. I know that's a bigger spread. It gives more emphasis on those top 5 categories, including improved connectivity, and then it lowers the importance of transit ridership, latent demand, feasibility, local support, and matching funds to 5 points. It's just a starting point. My recommendation.
I'm a little bit confused between what's the difference between destinations served and improved connectivity in terms of when people start trying to get their points, they could argue that they're, I don't know if they're distinct enough.
Maybe I could, there is some overlap. I think that's true. In terms of, for example, range of number of users, the project would serve a wide range of users and increase the number of pedestrian and bicyclists in the project area. Is similar to latent demand. The project would be more likely to generate walking and bicycling trips given other characteristics of the project area. And what they were trying to, there is a distinction though, that the latent demand focuses a bit more on, is the project in an area where there is more latent demand rather than does the project serve more users. It's a subtle difference and not that distinct. It doesn't make that great a distinction between the two. But you're right, there is some overlap between that and certainly connectivity has some role in increasing or responding to latent demand.
I have a slightly different proposal here, recommendation. Sure. I was just going to say, I think safety at 15, I would say range and number of users at 10, because I think if you add latent demand at 5 points, that would be the combined 15 right there. Countywide regional significance 15, destination serve 15. I'd put transit ridership at 10. I think that's very important. You could even improve connectivity to 15. And then feasibility, local and policy support, and matching funds, I all have decreased down to 5. I think, if all of those things, you have to demonstrate that. Obviously, matching funds, if you don't even have your match, you're not going to get the grant. So to me, that's trying to figure out, okay, I guess I don't understand the matching funds thing other than, if you're required to provide a local match.
But there is no requirement for a local match for this program. You could do it 100%.
Okay, but I would still say that to the degree that, is the overwhelming driving here the local match or
something else?
Is by the fact that a jurisdiction is going to contribute $10,000 to a project, is that going to make or break the scoring criteria and make it rise to a higher level? I guess it's all relative. And so that's why I would not put, give too much, as much on that. Feasibility, here again, that is kind of goes in with local and policy support. I mean, so I don't know. I think the top ones, obviously safety. I think it needs to be significant, especially if this is a countywide plan that's scoring. I mean, if it's based on the countywide applications for bike ped facilities and there's a limited pot of money, there needs to be some correlation between that. I think the destination served. Obviously, you want to make sure your money's being put to good use, improve connectivity, obviously, if there's an issue with gaps. But I think transit ridership is also kind of feeds into even to the latent demand. I mean, if you're improving connectivity and you're serving transit, then you're going to be increasing demand, and it's going to serve a greater number of users by default. So I don't know. That's just kind of my number off the top.
Could you go through those again? It's
15
for safety.
For safety, range of users 10, countywide regional state and it's 15, destinations 15, transit ridership 10, latent demand 5, improved connectivity 15, and the rest of those 5.
45.
Paul.
Well, don't want to monopolize this, but I'm trying to go off Jeremy's proposal. I'd like to actually maybe strike feasibility completely and give those, again, I think matching funds is important. I want to leverage this PBTF money with local money. So I think that would maybe increase matching funds and eliminate feasibility.
Could I make a pitch as the staff person who's been dealing with these projects for feasibility? We have been monitoring the local achievement or construction or development of the projects that were funded through both the TLC and the PBDF funds. And we have noticed that there have been significant delays. And I think the median delay is a year and a half beyond what was mentioned in the proposal. And that there are some projects that there are still 4 projects out of the projects that were funded that have yet to begin. And there are reasons why those projects were delayed, and there are some projects that were delayed because there were some feasibility issues that had we been known, we might have given money to a different project. And there's one project I have to call the sponsor back today to talk about how they're going to use their money, and they really didn't have a plan. But we gave them money anyway. It was a TLC funded project. So I would like to have feasibility as part of the scoring, that somehow we figure out, if a project has got design done, it should be rated more highly than a project that doesn't have design done. If it's had environmental done, it should be rated more highly. So that's my pitch.
Let me just maybe, that if we're looking at the bottom 3, if we're looking at, is local and policy support, I mean, couldn't we have matching funds as part of the local support? Or is there, can we revise the description for local and policy to support to say, for that local, that criteria, we could say that, part of local and support is to provide matching funds for the project or something like that, so that I don't know, I'm looking at ways to consolidate some of these because it seems like every year we always, we're reviewing these applications. We're always going to find letters of support. We're going to find letters of support from, transportation commissions or Bike East Bay or whatever. I mean, I don't know any project that didn't have any letters of support. So to me, I mean, I get that, but I understand what you're saying as well, is that the letters of support, even though it's great, it's not the issue that you're dealing with, or the feasibility that happens after the project grant has been awarded, and sometimes it gets hung up a year, 2 years down the pike. So I don't know. I don't know how to resolve that, but
I think there's some history also from Safe Routes to Transit from, well, it's MTCRM2 money that goes to Transform, I think it is. And they have high criteria, I remember, for safety and also for ability to leverage other funds, or I don't know what they called it, but I think they gave points for that. And as I remember, it may be TLC or PBTF because they went out at the same time, but there was a lot of issue around geographic equity, mainly because in West County we were able to meet the criteria because of the densities we had and just the layout of West County, so we got more money. I'm not saying we shouldn't get more money next time, but I'll just say that there was a lot of issue around it, or a lot of comment around it. And so I don't know if when you're creating criteria, you want to think about anything to do with geographic equity, because a lot of this pours favor into more densely populated areas.
All right, I'm concerned about what you said about feasibility, Brad, especially the current projects that we have. And I'm wondering how, if it's worth a few points, how are we going to identify that in the application, and whether this is going to be feasible or not? I don't think we identified it in the last go around, and it still happened. So I am concerned. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm if there's some way of making a project ineligible if it's not feasible, but I don't know how to identify whether a project's feasible or not. And so giving it points for how feasible it appears is probably a good idea. And I'll leave it at that.
Is it, Brad, do you have information on the Active Transportation Working Group? It mentions here, of course, that we're not going to have the agenda, information only. We're now at 12:40. Do we have more comments on last item?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I do have the agenda. I forgot it's on the table. I will hand it out. Are there any other questions on or comments on the criteria? I'll try to take your, one thing I could do, I've thought about doing this, is to do a sort of a modified discrete choice survey. It's where you rank, you have usually you do it with pairs, but in this case there would be 45 pairs, which is a lot of ranking to do, where you say, what do you like, what's more important, safety or range and number of users? What's more important, latent demand or transit ridership? And use those choices to make come up with what the people surveyed, in this case it would be you, what you believe are the ranking, the weighting, and use that as a way to come up with a proposal. And I'd bring it back to you in January. That's one thing we could do. We haven't really come down on whether how we would change the weighting today. Well, the schedule is that we want to have, we want to do a release in January, or. We won't be meeting again in January. That's right. That's right.
So you could put a little asterisk on this and say subject to change.
I'd rather not.
I think you heard our concerns. I don't know where to throw numbers and how it gets weighted, except the concerns are about, the ability to complete the project. So that sounds like a funding issue. Equity, which, how you define that, I don't even know what else, I'm just listing. But if you wanted to send a draft out to us with the point system that you've come up with, or the new criteria headings that you've come up with or something, and we could get back to you individually and just say, yeah, that looks good, or that maybe wasn't what the group wanted or something. But I just don't think we're going to have that much time to refine it further.
I have to agree that geographic equity is important, but I don't think we should tell those that it's going to be scored on that. That's just something for us and staff to spread out. Maybe in the introductory paragraph say, West County isn't going to get all this money this time.
Well,
Well, that was the problem last time, geographic equity, and I remember Jim being here, and I mean, having a pretty heated, conversation about, well, it was never intended to have geographic equity, and therefore, that's not what we should be looking at. And again, I'm not going to advocate one way or the other, but.
Other comments? Oh, sorry. Were you done?
I mean, it's possible that we could, if we have two options that have been suggested. Paul's suggestion that we put transit ridership at 15, and then all the ones that are 8 in the previous call for project, move them down to 5. And Jeremy's, which is to reduce range of users to 10, make transit ridership 10, improved connectivity 15, and then the last 3, 5. Either one add up to 100. Either of those options. I mean, one option is that we can just go forward today with one of those two. I'm not or I could do a kind of survey to, using that method that I mentioned. That sounds.
For him, though, not for us.
Oh, I thought it was going to be all of us.
Which is better, this or this one? Choose A or B.
I would support Jeremy's his proposal. In the interest of Joanna bringing up geographic equity, that's hard to build into this, but I think Jeremy's kind of lends itself more to that that thinking without it being explicitly put into the scoring. But I think reducing range number of users and transit ridership at 10 provides a nice balance while reducing those others. So, and definitely improved connectivity needs to be bumped up to 15. I think we're all in agreement on that. So I would support Jeremy's proposal.
So range of users and transit ridership are going to overlap some. So I like Jeremy's 10 on each of those. And I would think about putting local support and matching funds into one category, and then that makes feasibility down the list. So then you don't have to worry as much about the feasibility issue, because if you have some matching funds with policy and support, then it makes the lowest one be feasibility.
So you'd make local and policy support, including matching funds, be 10 points.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anything else? Okay. Well, we'll move on to the next item.
Is there consensus? Is there consensus?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't agree. I guess I'm the lone voice against. I want to see more points for matching funds. I do agree with some of the other things, but I'm voting for doing the procedure that Brad explained.
All right, well, let's take Brad's first. How many in favor of that? Brad's proposal. Okay, so we have 2. And Jeremy's?
I'm still ambivalent.
There's 3.
I feel too, what do you want to say, loading the deck or something? Because I know what would work better for us, but I do believe that we need to have the ability to leverage dollars. I mean, that seems logical. It should maybe be 15 instead of 10. Or whatever it's called, that section of our.
Maybe it'd be easier to, so the safety is 15, the destination served is 15, improved connectivity is 15, and countywide or regional significance is 15. There's 4 items. Does everyone agree with that? Because maybe we can just start skimming off what are the highest priority. Does everyone agree that should be the highest priority, or is there differences with? Right now, we're just scoring the highest. So, safety at 15, county regional significance at 15, destination served at 15, and improved connectivity at 15.
Well, again, I guess that's where I'm kind of disagreeing, because I believe matching funds is one of the most important. Maybe not the most important, but actually, I'll rescind that comment. I'll agree with those are the top 4.
Maybe we need 3 categories.
Yeah. Or maybe because we're trying to keep it at 10, so it's divisible by 100, right? We're trying to keep it at 10 criteria. Because to me, feasibility, some of these just really can be condensed. And then maybe we could have, something big enough, 5 big criteria with 20 points each or something. I don't know. Because feasibility and matching funds could go together.
Why is 100 such an important number?
It's that actually is probably the reason, the best reason, is that it's a common number that we use. We use it in percentages, and that's why it's nice to everything add up to 100. Though I think Jeremy mentioned that he thought that there are 4 of these criteria were the ones that were most important, and I got a sense that generally there's a consensus among the committee members that those are the 4 most important. If they were all 15 points, that would add up to 60 of the 100.
Yeah, there is a majority of the voters, people who vote. That's true.
So
Still
could,
a little bit split
could
here,
we
though.
approach this by listing numbers of points all over the board for all these items, and then figuring out that total and then adjusting it so that the numbers of points all add to 100? We don't have to do the chunking out at the start. We can do that mathematically at the end and say 8.5 points and 13.5 points or 17 points after we say 15, 15, 17, 16, right? There's a mathematical way to line it out to add to 100 after we figure out the order we want them in.
It goes back to Brad's method of surveying.
Well,
I'm indifferent, except that I think that is what we've heard is that there's obviously some feelings about different things, and if we want to have a dialogue, then we need to have the conversation here. We can't respond to a poll and have that dialogue. So, if everyone's okay with providing feedback and then ultimately that's the end of it, then let's go with the poll. But if you want to have continued dialogue, then we can't defer it. We need to be able to provide feedback because there's a timeline and there's an obligation that is us going with this funding source. So,
How do people feel about that?
I agree. I mean, I'm not comfortable doing this through a poll, quite frankly, so it seems like we're almost there, so.
So I'm gonna just recommend that the 4 items for 15 points that we just move forward with that allocation for those 4 categories, and that way that takes those off the table for additional discussion. If everyone's in agreement that there's no disagreement with that concept, then we can at least worry about the other 6 items on here.
Does everyone agree with that? Okay. All right.
No, I'm sorry. I don't want to commit to
No,
that
that's
until
okay.
we have this, all the points assigned. Again, I'd like to see matching funds worth more points. So if we keep the top 4 at 15, add matching funds at 10 points, and then maybe we'd have to lower transit ridership to 5, and then keep range of number of users at 10, improve connectivity. Well, you already have that one. And I don't know how that adds up. But again, giving 3 ranges, 15, 10, or 5, I'd like to see matching funds at 10. Is that
Okay, 15, 10, or 5.
So that's
Let's take 30 seconds.
60, 70, then there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Another way to think of it is if safety, countywide, regional significance, destinations, and connectivity are each 15, that's 60 points, leaves 40 points left to allocate. If matching funds were 10, that leaves 30 to allocate to 5 projects. It would be 6 points each if they were done equally.
Thank you. That's my proposal.
Okay, let's get on with it. 6 points each. We got stuff to do and the time is
Well,
clicking.
like Jeremy says, let's have a dialogue. Any comments?
Well, a question. I'm going to go back to countywide and regional significance. How much is that really? We have 15 points.
You said take that one off the table.
I did, but I also feel very strongly about transit ridership. I think if we're trying to, I think that feeds into the latent demand. I mean, I think if we're trying to improve connectivity, I think people are connecting to something. They're not just riding to no place. And majority of people, at least in a lot of central county jurisdictions here, are going to transit. They're going to the BART station. They're going to, bus terminals, whatever. And I think that's very important. And so, the only way we're going to get people out of their cars is to take something else. And the only way we're going to get them to take something else is if we can give them a connection there. So I like the gap, but to say that somehow, I think, from a planning perspective, I think that's where we have to go. That's where we need to be making sure. And it's not assuming just a BART station. It could be Amtrak. It could be a bus stop. Anything. I think, but I do think I feel very strongly that needs to be weighed a little bit higher than local and policy support.
All right, then I would propose, based on Jeremy's comment, is leave transit ridership at 10, and where was I? Oh, and take I lost my track. I thought I had the answer.
Okay, you work
Go
on
ahead.
the answer, and I'll make a statement here. Improved connectivity is from one bike lane to another bike lane where there's a missing segment of bike lane. That's what the non-bicyclist says is important. If there's a chunk with no bicycle facility, they're not going to go out there and take the lane. They're going to say, I'm not going to ride a bike, period. That's why Bike East Bay and I are arguing connectivity. You're taking it further and saying connectivity to some place. I'm saying connectivity between segments of the facility.
But I think you're both saying that it's an important criterion.
Absolutely. I also share Jeremy's concern about transit. I mean, we are in an area that is choked with traffic, and we need to do our best to try and get people out of their cars. And one way is bicycling if it's safer. And for a great number of people, it's transit. So I don't want to see that lost in the shuffle. I would rate that high too. Let's see. Do we have general agreement yet?
Well, not exactly. Again, Jeremy was proposing countywide or regional significance to drop that one down to 10, and keeping, I guess then you have 3 others that are at 15. Instead of, again, different opinion. I would just think countywide or regional significance is more important than, say, safety. As far as the applications, I'd rather take it out of safety than countywide or regional significance. And I don't know how that adds up. But I mean, again, we're doing this very slowly and tediously, but we're trying to get our priorities out of these 10 criteria. So that's my take.
Paul, what's the rationale for decreasing safety?
I'm trying to find a category to take the 5 points out of, to keep the other ones at a more higher scoring points. Safety, it's right. I'm just trying to prioritize what is most important for this. Obviously, safety is always the most important, but for scoring the applications, I don't know. Does it solve a safety problem? Is that how we're going to give these 15 points? Because not all projects that are really beneficial are going to solve a safety problem.
It's now 1 o'clock. Will people want to give it another 5 or 10 minutes, even though we're going past our time? We also have those 2 short items, mutual information, mutual interest, and announcements.
I'm going to recommend that we keep safety the way that it is, regardless of whether or not, I mean, obviously all the projects are going to need to be designed to be safe. However, there's a perception that if you're not ranking safety as the top issue, then it's somehow being considered less. So I'm not even worried that we were going to get applications that we have to score because it's necessarily improving safety, but with everything that we recommend, there absolutely should be that as the highest priority, and that for me is the bottom line. So if we want to go back down through here, if we want to just assume safety at 15, range as 10, countywide of regional significance is 10, destination served as 15, transit ridership is 10, latent demand is 5, improved connectivity is 15. We have an extra 5 points. I mean, if we can do feasibility, local and policy support, and matching funds. We have each of those right now as 5, but if we take 5 away from countywide and regional significance, so that way that's 10, we have an additional 5 points. So we can either combine something, we can bump up one of those, either 8, 9, or 10, to a higher number.
I would suggest, per Paul's proposal, to bump up matching funds to 10, if that might tip the scale.
I support that.
So 15, 10, 10, 15, 10, 5, 15, 5, 5, 10.
I'm sorry, but we're back where I didn't agree with that. Taking the 5 point. Again, this is the same argument we had 10 minutes ago where I didn't agree with Jeremy. It's a small point that we take the 5. Again, if everyone else is agreement, then by all means, I will go along with a consensus. I'm not in agreement with that. I don't think we should take the 5 points from countywide and regional significance. I think that should be a top scoring category.
Well, what about changing, do we want to change improved connectivity to 10? Do we want to have destination served go down to 10?
Not really. Again, out of those top 5, I would pick safety. is not as critical to the scoring process. I'm not saying safety is not the most important thing in a project, but for scoring what project we want to fund.
So in my mind, as we've talked about on several of these categories, there's overlapping characteristics of some of these. For example, destination served and latent demand to me is very somewhat similar. So that's 20 points folded in right there. So my proposal would be to, if we're looking for 5 more points, to reduce destination served to 10, keep latent demand at 5.
I'd throw out latent demand at all.
Or that too.
Well, the way latent demand is worded is that it's focused on the area, and it's sort of it's a kind of equity criterion in that it focuses a bit more on communities of concern or areas with zero-car households instead of sort of more generally how likely are people to use the facility. There's a slight distinction there.
Are we going to go out and do tours like we did last time? Because this is
That's
like
certainly
where
a
almost
possibility.
the reality, we get to see more, so we get to understand more. I mean, all these terminology things become less difficult.
Is done. Does Brad's explanation at all satisfy that latent demand should be kept? No? Okay. Well,
Not me.
We're not getting anyone. Darn it. If it's fine with the group, I'll go along with taking it from keeping safety at 15 and taking it from countywide regional significance, just simply because I don't think it's worth the argument. I think I can go along with the group, and we can call it a day. So, what we said was safety is 15, range and number of users 15, countywide regional significance 10, destination served 15, transit ridership 10, latent demand 5, improved connectivity 15, feasibility 5, local policy and support 5, and matching funds 10.
I think that's more than.
Yeah, that's more.
Whoop.
You're 5 over.
What did I miss?
The range in the users is 10 and
Right.
countywide significance 10.
Oh, okay, yes.
So there's 3 15 scores, the safety, the countywide and regional significance, and the improved connectivity. Is that what everyone?
I thought you wanted to reduce.
No, it's destination served.
Destination served, okay.
It's
all right.
15.
There we go.
Then countywide regional significance is 10,
10.
range of users is 10, transit ridership is 10, and matching funds is
Is
10.
10.
I like it.
Okay, everything else is 5.
It's 5.
Right. I do remember last time when we went out, and I remember looking at Moraga and thinking,
Yes.
this is a great bike lane, but it goes to nowhere. And so kind of getting back to that destination served, it's kind of like, I remember we're trying to figure out, okay, who are going to be using this? Because it's kind of a domino effect. If you're not serving a destination, then there's no range of users that's going to use it because they're not going anywhere. So I remember having that conversation with the planning manager at the time and thinking to myself, boy, we could be, and we didn't end up funding that project. I remember that fell off the list. But that's a classic example where if it's not serving a destination and it's just out in the middle of nowhere, it's not really serving the greater good and the best use of the money. So I do remember that as kind of a sideline comment, but.
And I think feasibility was an issue as well. So to your point, Brad, I remember some aspects of that where it's like, how are you going to build this? So it wasn't that well thought out. So anyway.
So I'm sensing that there's a consensus with that last proposal.
Yes.
Okay, I can go forward with that.
You
I'm
have all
happy
the
to do
numbers,
so.
Brad.
Yes, I do.
Changing them after changing them 4 or 5 times. Okay, let's quickly go through our last 2 items. does anyone have any information they want to share or any other business that we need to deal with?
Yeah. If you look on the CCTA's website, you see that just about every seat on this committee is vacant. So we need to not light a fire under Brad, but somehow we got to get the official list of members officially listed.
A notice went out, I think, from Randy
Yeah.
to all the RTPCs at least, to say, find your local citizen or appoint, reappoint. And so I think some of that's in the works.
There it is.
But East Bay Regional Parks, aren't they on here usually?
Sean Dugan
Sean
is
Dugan.
supposed to be attending.
Yes.
We got, yeah, we got to light a fire under him.
And I know some of the RTPCs are making their appointments.
Okay.
Announcements. Well, I have one. Putting on my climate rabble-rouser hat, there is a major rally and demonstration in Oakland, peaceful, permitted, in preparation for the COP21 climate talks in Paris, which may be affected by this, what has just happened. COP21 refers to the Conference of Parties meeting the nations, and 21 refers to the 21st time that they've been considering doing anything significant about climate change. And so we're trying to urge them to get off the pot and do something here. It's this week. It's this Saturday. I have a little flyer I can give you. Come on out if you like. It starts at Lake Merritt at 10:30, and there'll be a short march to City Hall where all kinds of speechifying and there's music involved too. So we expect there's some, 60, 70 environmental groups involved in this. So it's not a small thing. It's been a lot of outreach. Billboards at BART even we could afford this time, which is unusual. So I encourage you to come out. So.
Could I make one announcement? We didn't really discuss the Active Transportation Working Group. Dave, thank you for passing them out. I will say I will send you a link, so if you want to read the full packet, you can. There are some interesting things in it on bike counting, and
You attend?
I do attend, yes. I am the vice chair. So I'll send you the link to the full agenda.